MDMA is better for people with complex trauma, with more emotional wounding, you could say, who are dealing with really intense, heavy memories and emotions. The main reason ketamine is talked about so much is because it's legally available, like off-label, you can get it.
Why is that neuroplastic window, as we may call it, why is that important to understand, and how can we utilize that to the best of our ability for healing and transformation?
The brain, body, and nervous system are only separate in the words we use to speak about them. The reality underlying the words is all one thing. It's all one integrated thing. There's no evidence that any breathwork increases DMT release in the brain. There's actually no scientific evidence of that. Maybe it does, we don't know, but that hasn't been shown.
What's the biggest mistake you see people making in the land of psychedelics?
Psychedelics empower you to make changes in yourself. They don't make them for you.
This is Willpower.
Psychedelics are having a moment. I really think, actually, psychedelics are having a movement, a resurgence, a renaissance, if you will. If you haven't seen the conversation bubbling up all over for the last several years, and most recently the last 6 to 12 months on popular channels, New York Times, Brian Johnson doing live experiences where he's showcasing the stats and research and results from Psilocybin journeys, and more recently a 5-MeO DMT experience. It's at the forefront right now. And with so much change in the world, and it's not surprising to me that this is coming alongside the dawn of AI, but with so much change in the world and so many people wanting to dig in deeper and do some of the work to heal themselves, and the awareness that's arising in humanity right now, psychedelics cannot be ignored. And today's guest is one of the few people who can answer the question, not just what are psychedelics, but do we actually understand what they're doing to us? So I sit down with Manesh Girn. He's a neuroscientist and educator, and one of the clearest voices translating what is actually happening in the brain when we work with anything from empathogenic compounds like MDMA to classic psychedelics like psilocybin and LSD, all the way to the deeper end of the spectrum with 5-MeO, DMT, and Ibogaine. And he's not just in theory, he's in practice. Manesh recently published research in Nature, one of the most respected scientific journals in the world. And at the same time, he's actively supporting facilitators, guiding conversations around ethics, and helping bridge the gap between lab data and lived human experience. And this is a rarity. I had the chance to spend time with him recently. We were at a retreat in Austin, Texas. So I've spent time, hung out with him, chatted with him, socially, personally, professionally. And what really struck me immediately is that he's not just this brilliant guy. He's grounded. He's curious. He's so heart-centered. And he's someone who actually walked into these states himself, you'll hear in his opening story, and is willing to speak about them with honesty and really not an ego. So in this conversation, we're getting into the real mechanics, how different compounds shape the brain differently, why connection-based therapies work the way that they do, what's actually happening during the so-called neuroplastic window. What is that, Kristin? And how can I use that to my advantage? And why integration, not just the experience itself, not just chasing the dragon of experience over and over again, but why integration is where change is actually made. This conversation is for someone and anyone who just doesn't want to get a basic education or feel something, but really wants to understand what changes us and how we make choices for our own bodies to heal ourselves that are going to serve our highest. So let's lean into this conversation. I'm so excited to share Manesh Girn with you. Thank you so much for tuning in all the way from Mexico on your travels today.
Yeah, totally. It's great to chat with you. Thanks for having me.
Beautiful, beautiful. I want to start the show out by asking you and leaning into your personal world and everything that's gone on in your past, and just to query about a big challenge or maybe a trauma that's come up in your life specifically that informs all this beautiful work that you're doing today.
The way I would answer that is in terms of the arc that got me interested in psychedelics, and that actually led to my first psychedelic experience and why it was so impactful for me. I was partially, high school is an interesting time for a lot of people, right? And around ninth grade-ish, just suffering through some bullying, and my quote-unquote friends from elementary school were kind of turning on me, saying stuff behind my back, the classic kind of high school thing. And just, I was having a rough time, and kind of was in a really insecure, kind of like, feeling socially ostracized place. And I was kind of like grasping for something, right? Something like to hold on to build myself up and to aspire towards. And around that time, I was somehow, oh, I guess I, not somehow, I was working at a restaurant as a dishwasher at the time. It's like first job, I was 16. And there's a guy there who would always talk about like the occult or secret societies or psychedelics or astrology. You know, like, this stuff's fascinating. We don't learn this in school. Nobody's talking about this. And that put psychedelics on my radar. And then in the summer after 10th grade, I tried mushrooms for the first time. And it was like I was able to see how I had all these beliefs and structures that I was living from. And it's like, why do I gotta hold on to that? It allowed me to expand beyond my limited kind of horizon of attention and framing of the world and see the world in a new way and see myself in a new way. And that was kind of instrumental in me coming out of the kind of limiting beliefs and limiting model of myself that I had, and also learning about my passion and curiosity for these things, how they work, how the brain works, how the mind works, and spirituality and all these things. And so, yeah, this arc from being bullied and needing something to grasp onto led to that experience, which then made it really impactful for me.
And when you had that mushroom experience, were you like with some friends and you were like, let's just take a handful? Or did you think about dosage? Or because people are always asking me about like, we'll get into dosage and the kind of containers we set up. But was it just like a rough and tumble out in the woods, or was it more contained than that?
Oh, this was a while ago, right before all this psychedelic mainstreaming has happened.
Yeah, yeah.
And, it was 10th grade. So basically, my friend, she got some mushrooms off her older sister, and we
Hmm.
did it at the beach in Vancouver on Canada Day for the fireworks. I still
Wow.
remember. And
Perfect
so we're at
setting.
like, yeah, exactly. And it's like probably like 2 grams, not a crazy amount, although that could be crazy depending on the strain. But yeah, we're just at the beach, and it was this crazy environment where I was like people watching and feeling like I could intuit where people's energy in much more detail than I usually can, and kind of just having these reflections on what are we even doing here? We're a bunch of advanced primates on this beach hollowing at lights in the sky. Like, it's just so absurd. This is what the hell is going on here?
Yeah, and what a big insight to have in that part of your youth, for sure. It's like, you're touted in your work. If we jump to the trajectory of like the now, you're a neuroscientist, you're a science communicator, and a really, what I love is like the psychedelic education that you do. You can make it so approachable, so easily to the common person, which is part of the reason that you're here, but also you can swing the bats with the pros in the arena, just as well. And so, how did you go from that space of saying, look at where these curious primates, and this is so interesting, and how can I expand my lens, to landing in the seat in the position and knowing, because you've been doing this for some time. So, it feels to me like you were like in a deeper knowing to say, I want to expand upon this without necessarily understanding the huge psychedelic renaissance was coming at us in the way that it is today.
Yeah, I figured, at the end of high school, it was like, okay, how can I pursue something that aligns with my interests? And what am I interested in? I'm interested in psychedelics, consciousness, the universe, spirituality, like Eastern mysticism. And so the question was, how can I formulate that into a career? I was like, oh, I could be a researcher. I could just be paid to study this stuff. Like, what a dream. I could get paid to nerd out on things that I love. And so that kind of like got me thinking like, oh, I should study philosophy and psychology. And then that drew me to neuroscience. And then I was like, oh, there's a cool lab doing research on meditation near me at UBC in Vancouver, Canada. And so I joined that lab, and then one thing led to another, and just pursued it, and just all was aligned, and all just happened.
So amazing. And then from a space of like your upbringing and your family and world and culture, because this is something that people are navigating quite often, both the listeners at large and myself as a facilitator, is like there's a view of the psychedelic landscape by the general population that's still somewhat restricted. And this is drugs. And this is like, did you feel like as you were doing research, it was a bit more forgiving because it's the research landscape and things can be talked about in a scientific, lab format versus like the world of recreational use?
Yeah, totally. I think, from the very beginning, because I was also inspired by books I was reading. I was reading Stan Groff, I was reading Aldous Huxley, these kind of very articulate, intelligent, well-credentialed, et cetera, people talking seriously about it, right? And so that was my frame. And so when I would talk about it, I would talk about it from that angle. I'd just be taken more seriously from the beginning. And
Yeah.
so I never really encountered much resistance, shocking or not. I mean, West Coast and Vancouver, it's like, okay, it's like not like a lot of places in the world, but it was very smooth. People were supportive and curious, and my family too. And I've been very blessed in that way.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, it's the one thing when I started working more inside the container of leading psychedelic work and IFS parts therapy and all the things that that we do, because we've been connected through my mentor, Mike Zeller, that I was like, if I'm going to do this in the world, I'm going to speak about it openly, both sharing insights, information, research, and the education on the podcast with people like you who have this deeper understanding, as well as I'm going to be very clear about like sending my mom the book that everyone needs to read about psychedelics and, making sure that there's an understanding that my family is like knowing I'm doing this work, as opposed to there's plenty of people that are still sort of like hiding a bit in the trenches with this work, where I think, and I'd love to hear your opinion to expound upon a bit, just like what psychedelics means to us in the landscape of health and well-being right now in the world.
Yeah, there's so much there, right? And there's many ways I can answer that. But one kind of frame that I think is really helpful is seeing psychedelics as pattern disruptors or kind of like worldview shakers or de-rigidifiers, right? And they're kind of like, they induce these powerful experiences where we kind of let go of our usual frame of viewing the world and step out of our usual habitual thoughts, et cetera, and just allow us to pursue new perspectives, new lines of thought and on ourselves, on the world. And so I think, in this world we're in, clearly things are not working and old structures are collapsing. And in this chaos, something else is going to emerge. And hopefully it's a good thing. And we need to help co-create that positive aspect of it. And I think that requires fundamentally novel thinking and also systems level thinking, kind of bridging disparate kind of domains and ways of viewing the world and integrating and creating new coherence and, seeing the connections. And I think psychedelics really help with that by kind of letting us step back and kind of see things from a new way. And then the brain effects, as we'll talk about in a moment, I'm sure, is, there's a variety of ways in which it helps us make those distinct connections for those new insights.
Yeah, so let's get into that a little bit, just mechanistically, like just from the lens of neuroscience, the understanding of what happens in the brain. Because I think in layman's terms, I speak to people specifically when they're unpacking or processing trauma or occurrences in their life, when they're trying to expand into greater performance, or let's call it open-mindedness, right? For more possibility, more innovation and iteration. The way that I always speak about it is that from our childhood and our developmental years, we've created stories and patterns that the brain then sort of continues to connect to, that it's defaulting to the old resonance of what happened last time to create what's happening going forward. And that's pretty straightforward shot of the layman's world of it all. But I wonder if you could unpack it a little and like actually what's happening in like the tissue, the brain, the synapses that is making that, and call me out for as where I missed the boat on that as well.
Yeah, I think a helpful framework. Well, first I want to say what you're describing is very much on how I would describe it, on point. And in terms of like, we build up these world models, we build up expectations and beliefs, and that's basically how our brain creates predictability, it creates stability, it creates a sense that we know what's going on, as like true or not true that is. But it gives us this sense, right? And like the way that neuroscientists think about it is that our brain's creating these models that are then used to predict what's going to happen, and then we're constantly updating them based on what actually happens. And so we build up these models, and the thing is, a lot of our models occur or are built unconsciously. We don't know we're building them, particularly early in life. And nobody has a perfect childhood, right? And so we internalize all these beliefs and perspectives of how worthy we are for love and success and how safe or dangerous the world is. And all these things which influence our behavior and how we view the world. And then we bring that to our adult relationships and our career prospects, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think, psychedelics help us loosen its grip on us, basically, and allow us to see beyond that and kind of restructure these core beliefs and assumptions. And so in the brain, there's a lot of research suggesting there's a particular brain network called the default mode network, which is a set of particular brain regions that seem to be involved in creating our internal narrative, our stories of who we are. It allows us to remember the past and think about the future in ways that other primates can't, other animals can't. And that network particularly is one of the most affected by psychedelics, because also this network has a very high amount of this particular type of brain receptor called the serotonin 2A receptor that psychedelics target. And if you block, for example, if you block that receptor with another drug and give a psychedelic, people don't trip. So we know it's very selective to that receptor. And so it's interesting that receptor is on this part of the brain that's literally creating our worldview and our self model. And so it's kind of, a no-brainer, like, oh, that's why all that's so disrupted. Is what psychedelics do, or one of the things they do is they make the neurons, the brain cells in those regions activate a lot more and in different patterns than they usually activate. So this kind of leads to greater cross connections between different regions. It kind of blurs over the usual patterns and creates new ones. And this translates in our kind of psychological experience as like, oh, like the beliefs I view the world through are not as stable. It's like, oh, you're questioning your basic assumptions about reality. And that's like a huge opportunity in the right context or the right guidance to then shift that in potentially a more healthy or like reality aligned way.
Yeah. And when you are talking about the serotonin 2A receptor, is it specifically that like serotonin is the bit like we talk about serotonergic and function of the psychedelics, but there are other receptors, correct me if I'm wrong, based on certain psychedelics that do get affected as well?
Definitely, yeah. It's by no means the only receptor that psychedelics target. They hit at least, like so when I say psychedelics, I'm mainly referring to like psilocybin, which is mushrooms, LSD, DMT, ayahuasca, mescaline too, and to a certain extent 5-MeO-DMT. So they all hit at least half a dozen serotonin receptors pretty strongly, but we know the 2A is most important, but the others contribute too, and there are other systems being involved too. Like LSD hits the dopamine system a bit more than the other drugs. Mescaline might as well, etc.
Yeah. And can we just speak briefly to this Ibogaine piece, this Iboga piece that's come up a lot, both in the just governmental advocacy here in Texas, and then also it's just creating, there's a wave of popularization amongst vets and PTSD and War in Waves, this documentary I'm sure that you've seen, and just it's a really interesting flow through to see something come up that has less strict boundaries on it from a regulation standpoint and how people are utilizing that. And I know a bit about it because of course I'm packing it more and more, but I'd love to just hear a little bit about how that functions either, in alignment or in opposition to these other psychedelics.
Yeah, Ibogaine is a really unique case. It's a fascinating one. And actually the pharmacology, like in terms of the receptors it hits, how it works in the brain, is actually far more complex than psilocybin or LSD or these other psychedelics. It's very much in its own category. In a different world, it wouldn't even be called a psychedelic. We call it something else because it's that distinct in terms of the brain effects. And there is another term for it, actually. People call it onerogen, where oneric means like dreamlike. So it's like a dream generator. People call it that because people will often have very vivid kind of dreamlike images and look, feeling like they have a movie screen showing them movies of landscapes, images, past experiences, etc. And so, it's a very unique one in terms of how it affects the brain. It also lasts very long. The main duration of it is about 10 hours, but then it will be another 10 hours of coming down, basically. And it could be, basically a 24-hour experience for a lot of people, which is a lot. And somehow its effects allow for a rewiring of the brain that's different and perhaps in certain respects more deep than other psychedelics, specifically in the reward system. Like the main interest is for opioid addiction, right? And fentanyl addiction and this kind of stuff and heroin. And somehow it rewires your reward circuitry in a very deep level that can even reduce or eliminate withdrawal effects afterwards, which is unheard of. And so there's a lot we don't know about it. It's a fascinating, unique one for sure.
Yeah, it's been interesting to sort of see that unfold in a way that feels, a timeline that feels quite fast paced just versus all the other psychedelics coming to the forefront. But there's so many of these medicines, let's call them medicines. I know people may in their mind or their vernacular call them drugs, but there's so many of these medicines and psychedelics that are on these stage 2, stage 3 trials. There's so much research being done around the world of MAPS, like the multidisciplinary, psychedelic associations and the conferences, and people are connecting dots in ways they haven't before. And just to sort of narrow down to two, because we mentioned a few of the psychedelics in the landscape, and I've had Paul Austin on speaking about, the landscape of what each one of those things from a one-on-one perspective. So you can always listen to that Third Wave podcast to get some basics. But I'd love to sort of lean into this MDMA and psilocybin and the world of these two psychedelics. And again, there's even a differentiation just to explain a little bit more about each of them and the fact that there is a difference when it comes to sort of visuals and perception of, seeing things and all that between the two, because there has been a conversation where people still say, well, is MDA really a traditional psychedelic or not? And maybe you could unpack those two categories of medicines for us.
For sure, yeah. So psilocybin falls into the category we'd mainly be talking about, like the serotonin 2A agonists, as we'd call them, the classic psychedelics. And so this works through the mechanisms I was describing, right? It's like disrupting the default mode network and increasing connectivity in the brain, inducing neuroplasticity, which we can get to, and is useful for that kind of self-world model of remodeling, right? And MDMA works very differently. It does target the serotonin 2A, but much, much less than psilocybin. But the main way it works is by increasing levels of three different neurotransmitters: serotonin, dopamine, and noradrenaline. And primarily serotonin. Serotonin is orders of magnitude more than the other two. And so it's really flooding your brain with serotonin is the main mechanism of MDMA. And that has a few different effects. It kind of levels out our anxiety, calms us down, really chills us out, and like reduces our emotional defenses, right? And allows us to be more open, and simultaneously gives you a kind of euphoria and an increased capacity for empathy. So you're in this like kind of relaxed, pro-social, you want to engage and speak from the heart, and your defenses are down. And then you get the dopamine, which actually, in this case, relates to focus and your ability to focus and keep your mind straight. And then the noradrenaline is like arousal, so wakefulness. So this interesting place where you're relaxed, empathic, ready to engage, but you're also able to think and you're not completely just lost in space, and you're awake and aroused, like in your present. And so that unique combination gives it a unique set of effects, which is more conducive to working through interpersonal problems, dealing with trauma and like really complex, really intense emotions in a way that you won't be overwhelmed, et cetera, et cetera. So it's quite different. And I would even say I wouldn't call MDMA a psychedelic personally.
It gets, I think, bundled into that because I talk about it a lot as an empathogen, and it's bundled in that way. And just to speak to so people in the audience who may or may not have tried some of these things, like the big differences that I see or I feel with clients is psilocybin seems to be a bit more of like an inward, expansive journey where things are maybe being spoken about or movements happening, but it's much more of a sitting with someone while they're experiencing more wholeness and more expansion inwardly, whereas MDMA feels like more of an outward substance to use where there's, like you said, pro-social behavior, connection, and the capacity and desire, I think, to speak more, to talk more about things that are coming up. Would you say that's sort of like, is there anything you'd sort of add to that frame?
Yeah, I think that's broadly accurate in most cases, but I would say there's also a lot to say about just internally directed MDMA journeys. And
Yeah.
often, that love you project outwards can be projected inwards. And we all need more self-love, right? That's like a hugely important thing. And so I think there are cases in which people under MDMA in these trials and et cetera, in these clinical sessions are less verbal. They're definitely going internally and exploring their mind like they're on a psychedelic. And so that's definitely possible, and it can be really helpful too.
Welcome to the initiation. There is a clear shift happening. More people, more facilitators are stepping into intentional psychedelic journeys for processing, for reset right now. But the support systems haven't caught up. People are entertaining powerful experiences without a trusted way to prepare their body or support themselves during or properly integrate afterwards. That's the gap that Vessel is solving. Vessel has been around for about the past year, and I've had a chance to beta test it with my clients. It's a supplementation protocol, the Love Stack. And Vessel is building this true standard of care for supporting the body through the full journey. The first product, Love Stack, is a 3-phase supplement protocol for preparation, for support, and for restoration. It's built to meet the real demands of these experiences, and this is not theoretical. In the last year, it's been used across 700 real users, tested in real-world journeys, with 95% reporting a more stable mood afterward. And even more telling, the company has grown with no paid marketing. This has got to be one of the first ads you've ever heard about it, and I want you to be curious about this. If you're leading, facilitating, practicing peak experiences, if you're in a community, the small communities that have started testing this product have been recommending it over and over again because it consistently supports people through the journey in a therapeutic, intentional way. This isn't about shortcuts. This is about respecting the process, respecting the ritual, and supporting it through a supplement protocol that's never existed before until now. Because if you're stepping into meaningful work or you're guiding others through it, the standard should be higher. And I want you to explore it with me at myvessel.co. myvessel.co. Vessel, because every journey needs a co-pilot. When we look at this landscape of psychedelics and we look at a lot of people like John Robinson working with, and the work that we've seen Mike Zeller do, that we're doing within the space with MDMA and therapeutic coaching or counsel, do you feel like we're nailing it on the head with MDMA being sort of the lead in that space? As I know lots of people are out there doing ketamine therapy, and there's there's a lot to unpack here, but it's just like if you were looking at one of these for like in the landscape of psychedelics and pathogens or things we've spoken about more for like trauma processing and healing, is that the direction we go versus one that's more like meaning making and the differentiation between the two?
Yeah, me personally, I mean, ultimately, this is a research question, right? It's an empirical
Yeah.
question, but I think based on how it works, an MDMA is better for people with complex trauma, with more emotional wounding, you could say, who are dealing with really intense, heavy memories, etc., and emotions. I think MDMA, by creating that kind of blanket of euphoria and relaxation and grounding and inner safety, really allows people to go to these difficult places more easily. Whereas with psilocybin, especially with people with more complex PTSD or trauma, that could be re-traumatizing if it's not. That's like a very sensitive thing to hold in a container by the facilitator. And so I think MDMA is more suited for that kind of stuff. Whereas perhaps, after somebody's worked with MDMA a few times and kind of de-intensified some of that trauma and those emotions and, reconsolidated, etc., then maybe psilocybin and those kind of more expansive exploratory journeys are more suitable. And then ketamine is an interesting one. I mean, the main reason ketamine is talked about so much is because it's legally available, like off label, you can get it. And
Even
it's
in the
different.
mail now, people are like mailing out injectable, and it's so
Yeah,
interesting.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if I approve of that. That's kind of wild, but that's the whole topic. But ketamine is a whole different one. It affects the brain differently than MDMA and psilocybin, and it's more like giving you distance from your thoughts and emotions, kind of seeing them almost impersonally, so you can then kind of maybe see them more objectively or process them. And so it's referred to as a dissociative, right? Because it creates this distance between you and things you're experiencing. And that can be useful therapeutically and definitely worked with. But I think MDMA is a more powerful one for that kind of processing.
Yeah, and I want to speak a bit to this term neuroplasticity. We've heard it. I was telling you sweetly that I was saying you're the Andrew Huberman of psychedelics, and that neuroplasticity is a term that, of course, it's been in the vernacular for some time, but I think it's been quite popularized by him on his show. There's a lot of conversation around it. We were talking about another researcher that you've met and seen her unpack a bit around the world of neuroplastic, the ability for the brain to be malleable. And I'd love to speak to that more since you have such a high level of expertise in that, sort of what exactly is happening in the brain and why we have these moments, these peak experience of these molecules, but why and what is happening to the brain over time from that peak experience through the days or weeks following that gives us an added benefit. Like why is that neuroplastic window, as we may call it, why is that important to understand, and how can we utilize that to the best of our ability for healing and transformation?
Yeah, so there's many aspects to neuroplasticity. At its core, to say it the simplest, it's your brain's ability to change itself, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you go deeper, it's like, okay, it's the ability for neurons to create new connections between each other or to change existing ones, with the idea that new neuronal connections, new neuronal pathways leads to new ways of thinking, ways of acting in the world, ways of responding, et cetera, et cetera. And so, as we've alluded to, psychedelics, through that serotonin 2A receptor mainly, increase neuroplasticity pretty potently in the brain, in certain parts of the brain. And this can last after one experience with, let's say, psilocybin or ayahuasca or Ibogaine, 30 days plus. You have this increased malleability of your brain to basically learn new habits, unlearn old ones, and to basically change your behaviors, etc. And what's really happening at the level of neurons is that it literally stimulates them to grow new kind of branches or protrusions called dendrites that allow given neuron to connect with more other neurons. And so there's a greater number of potential connections that then can be selectively sustained afterwards, right? And the selectively is an important part because, like, if your brain, let's say, despite this is a random number, let's say there's 100 new dendrites with 1,000 new connections. If you only use 100 of those connections, you're only going to keep 100 of those connections, right? You're not going to keep all 1,000. That wouldn't be efficient for the brain. And so that's where integration comes in, because if you have all this plasticity, it's giving you this opportunity to change things. But if you're not making concrete, consistent, deliberate, persistent changes in your life, those are just going to fade away. Your brain's going to retract them. They're going to literally going to disappear.
If you go down the road of patterning yourself to do something that is even more detrimental over and over
Yeah.
again, starting the days after, then that can create connectivity in the opposite direction you want to move forward in. You would say
Yeah.
that's true, yeah?
Yeah, fully. Yeah, it's just plasticity is neutral, right? It's how you mold it
Yeah.
that matters. So it's totally
Yeah.
that. And And so, yeah, it's about being extremely mindful of what you're doing after the experience, what actions you're doing, being conscious of trying to implement new patterns and ways of being. That's integration, right? And I think that's, of course, essential.
Yeah, for sure. And when we're looking at the landscape of these psychedelics or some of the medicines we've spoken about today, are there some that have a better neuroplastic window longer? You're talking about 30 days, right? And sometimes I look at research studies from across the board where it's like as short as 2 days and as long as a month, or there's more, ability to build over time if you start the process right away, or like, what would you say are sort of the guidelines? And I think part B of this question is because you and I have spoken at the retreat and I've heard some of your presentations around the win that psilocybin is for neuroplasticity. Could we just put it in with everything we're doing to create a larger neuroplastic window and be able to create more sustainable transformation? Or does that kind of not make sense over the long haul?
The research on neuroplasticity with psychedelics is 99% in rodents. And so we're generalizing from non-human animals just
Yeah.
because it's much more easy to study it in rodents because we can, sacrifice some, slice their brain, stain it, and really see the neurons. Obviously, you can't do that with humans. And so there's a lot of it is generalizing from that, right? I think that's an important point. And then two, there's different types of neuroplasticity, right? And so the plasticity I've been talking about is the kind of main serotonin 2A plasticity, which relates to our prefrontal cortex and probably regions in our default mode network too. So these are related to our habitual thought processes, our ability to regulate our emotions, our self models, our narratives. In addition, previously you mentioned Gul Dolan, who's now at Berkeley. She was at Johns Hopkins before, and she popularized a kind of different type of neuroplasticity called critical period reopening, which is probably what you had heard of. Again, this is in rodents, but specifically, she's talked about a social reward learning critical period where basically mice are only able to learn positive social conditioning in a particular way until I think 90 days after they're born. And then after that, they're no longer able to learn that conditioning. Basically, their ability to learn that it's good to hang out in places where they have positive social interactions. That's what it boils down to. And if we translate that humans, maybe that pertains to like positive social conditioning around enjoying being around others or feeling safe around others. That's obviously like extrapolation, but possibly that's the case. And in rodents, after psilocybin and MDMA, that critical period gets reopened for 2 weeks. And so literally the rodents go back to their sensitivity to being conditioned. They go back to what they were like very close to after when they were born. So when they're really young. So you're really, in a sense, reverting back to childhood levels of plasticity and your ability to receive social conditioning in rodents. And so the idea is maybe that happens in humans too, and plausibly it does to some extent, right? And so MDMA and psilocybin seems to be 2 weeks, LSD 3 weeks, Ibogaine a month plus, and ketamine 2 days. That's all in rodents again, just to highlight that.
It's like we're talking about this integration piece too. And I think I have a brain question for you actually that I want to get some more clarity on because I talk a lot about the prefrontal cortex and breathwork and the default mode network and psychedelics. And I know that the brain is like, it doesn't look exactly like the plastic head we took off in biology that has like little separate parts that we're like, we can take out and say it's all interconnected. And so I think I want to get a better understanding, or just for the audience as well, like the default mode network function versus like the prefrontal cortex, right? Because there's sort of a rational part of the mind that's making your day-to-day CEO decisions, and the interplay of those two is what I'm curious about.
For sure. And yeah, you're totally right. There's several different networks in the brain. A popular way of characterizing it says 7 main ones. And they're all constantly interacting to varying degrees, right? So there's like this dance between kind of specialized areas that are distinct, but then that they're also integrated at the same time. And so the default mode network is what we've been talking about. And the prefrontal cortex is often associated with a network. We can call it the executive control network, or the frontal parietal control network is a more anatomical definition. So that part of the brain that involves the prefrontal cortex and the network it's connected to, it's involved in focused attention, kind of problem solving in the world, and our ability for like complex planning of the future, and also our ability to guide the flow of our thoughts, right, as well as regulate our emotions. The prefrontal cortex and default mode network are the two most recent things kind of together. Yeah. So we talked about the default mode network creates these narratives, basically creates our mind wandering, like our automatic thoughts that appear in our brain, in our minds all the time, right? Those things that we were not consciously choosing to think about, but obviously we get consumed by them, right? And so that's the default mode network kind of run wild. It's pulling us into these stories and fantasies and worries and projections, and all that is in the mind. And so the prefrontal cortex is a way of choosing what we want to focus on and what we don't want to, and also deliberately pursuing certain lines of thought in more depth. Like sitting here like, oh, I want to think about rabbits. And that was the most random thing that came to my mind. But think about rabbits, and then you're choosing to constrain the space of infinite possibility of thoughts to rabbits. Whereas that's your prefrontal cortex. But without that, I'll just be sitting here thinking about, oh, like, what am I going to eat for lunch later? Or things that just come automatically. And so prefrontal cortex is a way to regulate other networks, basically.
There's this notion of, and I do a ton of like breath work in the world, but there's notion of this like creating psychedelic experiences without actual use of psychedelic medicine, and breathing in different styles, circular breathing, rebirthing breathing, stuff that Stanislav Grof made popular. There's so many different styles right now. Shout out to all those breath workers who've brought it to the fray. But I wonder if there's like a feeling that you have around that comparison of, you look online on YouTube and you see people saying like DMT breath work and, psychedelic breath work, and you can still get high on your own supply. And I've experienced that as well, being in no medicine or on no substances in my body and having otherworldly experiences. And is there a similar pathway there? Is it like an exact same thing that's happening? I know we're talking in a landscape of many different breathwork styles but if we're over breathing ourselves and we're actually like exciting the body in that way and dumping a lot of CO2, because that mechanism get us to a space that could feel similar to what a psychedelic is actually doing, like at a brain receptor level, or is it a different mechanism of action?
It's definitely not the same. It could be overlapping. There could be serotonin two-way stuff going on. Basically, I feel like a major connection is this like nervous system overwhelm or system overwhelm. And you see this with your cold plunges too, in like more intense breath work. It's, you get into this state that's trance-like, and your conscious mind is overridden, and you're just kind of like surrendered into it. So it's a state of overwhelm and surrender. In that case, that's very strong twist around psychedelic journey. And in those states of surrender and overwhelm is a state of openness and almost an ego transcendence, right? And it's like moving those filters and blinders out of the way, moving our sense of self out of the way. And I think that's why, these things could be a source of insight and a sense of being rejuvenated and like the reset feeling. So I think that's common across psychedelics and these other modalities. But, I just want to say there's no evidence that any breath work increases DMT release in the brain. There's actually no scientific evidence of that. Maybe it does. We don't know. But like just, that hasn't been shown. Neither has it been shown in dreaming either, for that matter. A lot of people believe these things. But for various reasons, it hasn't been found in the brain. But there are definitely overlaps, and there are ways in which the benefits could be similar. But my sense is that the neuroplastic benefit with psychedelics is much higher, although, the former can also have that as well.
Yeah, it's good to hear also. So I get that people love a sensational hook. But if I see one more video on DMT breathwork, I might just like throw my computer off the balcony.
Straight up, Mark. Yeah.
What are the best things that came out of and the worst things that came out of you witnessing? I don't know if you witnessed it live when it happened or just read a lot about it, but witnessing Brian Johnson doing a live, mushroom trip over the course of a month. He didn't think he did 2, and just has been sharing so much of his own. Of course, it's N of 1 experimentation, but were there any like sort of like key highlights that you were like, I love that this is landing in the general population for health and well-being, and anything you feel like was like super overlooked in that, or maybe just a negative response to share with society?
I think it was a net positive for sure for the space. And it's interesting how little the longevity biohacking space intersects with the psychedelic space. Like that is really interesting to me. It's probably not going to always be like that. Almost definitely not, especially with Brian doing that. So I think it's a good way to show the health and physiological and holistic benefits of psychedelics to a broader audience that wasn't particularly exposed to that. And really, in terms of like how he broke down the science, or his science team, or whoever's telling him these things, I thought they did a pretty good job. I mean, it was pretty solid. It wasn't overly like hand wavy, or wasn't just repeating common narratives. It was like, okay, clearly they looked at the actual research to an extent. And so overall, I mean, it could have been much worse how it was portrayed and explained. And so I was kind of impressed, actually. Like, okay, this is kind of solid. I think people have critiqued it by like, oh, like, he's highlighting how he's so privileged he could just show himself doing an illegal drug online and not really care about it. And like people that don't have access, I heard that critique. I mean, there's various things people can say, right? It's like, oh, he's hyper rationally approaching it. That gets rid of the kind of mystery or the connection to something greater. He's reducing in terms of these quantitative biomarkers and kind of this rational process of optimization rather than seeing the broader kind of spiritual import of it. People can have all sorts of critiques, but in general, I think it was great. I think it was positive for the space and could have been much worse for sure.
I think if there's someone who was going to steward that live, there's not that many better people to maybe do it. And some of the writing he had in the days after, especially like the week or so after, about the woman he's dating and like just really like it seemed to me to be more open-hearted and like brought a lot of things that might be more spiritual or heart-centered into the space that, he knows his audience, right? He's a health optimization guru or whatever you want to call him, right? He's a health optimization is his lane. So he's going to focus on that. And I think a lot of us want to have like the nerdy science. I just wondered how like it landed with the research community because you're all like, what's going to happen here? And what's he going to say? But yeah, I didn't mind it. I think it was good to see that as a steward. And just like from a divine feminine perspective, I was like, he's sweetly speaking in a different way about relationship and about relationship to people and relationship of the one to the whole, or, there's only one thing and we are all it. And a little bit more of that like understanding of the 5D, if that's what you want to call it, just taking it out of science, maybe 5 or 10%, and some of the posting and the shares that he did after. So I kind of like that edge of vulnerability that I hadn't seen before from him. So whether that's
Cool.
related to the trips or not, I don't know. I would love to get your opinion on integration for these things too, because this is, I've worked with Ta and Cole Whitty and been through several different programs, really getting a grok of what integration means and why it's so important. And quite frankly, that integration is not optional. It's like it is the master wheel for how we drive our vessel forward for transformation. And I wonder what you feel like with all the research and education and understanding you have, what locks in a bit of the new ritual or the new paradigm of your human post psychedelics in an integration window. Is it like therapy? Is it journaling? Is it working with a coach? Is it all of the above? Is it, what are the behavioral things that we can do? Maybe there's an answer for if you have a budget and if you have a low budget or no budget, but where do you think it's sort of where we move the needle?
I think the best way to think about integration is that it's how to best use the period in which you're more sensitive to what you're doing, or you're more imprintable to what you're, in relation to what you're doing. And so ultimately I see psychedelics as synergistic medicines that then synergize with whatever else you're doing in your life. They don't, operate in a vacuum. And so it's really about what are you doing in your days after, and in terms of harnessing it, it's being conscious and deliberate in that. It's journaling in the morning. It's like, or just in general, being clear on these are my takeaways. So these are my core insights, and narrowing that down to like 3, let's say, like the concrete insights, and then going from those insights to measurable, specific, actionable things you could do in your life, and then tracking those daily, weekly, whatever, and ideally having an accountability buddy. So these are all things that would be very, very helpful regardless. But with psychedelics, they kind of like grease your wheels a little bit or kind of push you out the door, give you some momentum to help you make that change a bit more easily. So it's really about engaging in some kind of structured behavior or thought change program. And, additional supports, like taking space for yourself. If you're going to have a profound experience on Sunday, then go back into a grind all day on Monday, you're going to lose that magic, and it's easy to get pulled back into patterns. And so I know it's like a privilege to be able to have spaciousness, and not everyone has that, but it's finding it in the way that you can and just making space for yourself and just to be present and not really do anything. And that could be doing nothing, sitting at home. That could be going for a long walk, even if it's like an hour-long walk, like a self-care walk to connect to yourself. Or it could be through physical activity where you're kind of turning off your brain. And also great support, obviously, of course, is meditation, mindfulness practice. There are a lot of great apps out there, Headspace, Calm, Insight Timer, going to a yoga class. And I love to run. So like even just like going on a long run, or just even at the gym, going on a treadmill, putting it on like a lower speed, like 4 or 5 miles an hour, I guess is the number. And then just running for half an hour. Like that itself. Well, running too increases BDNF and neuroplasticity, but what's really important is maintaining that self-connection and presence and clarity that allows you to act in the ways you want to act and prevents you from defaulting to previous patterns.
So if we unpack that from sort of a movement lens, it's like highly recommending that there's like you're getting some sort of physical movement. Now, I know we're all trying to take 10,000 steps or whatever. I mean, beyond that, it's like adding something into the practice that is like physical training or exertion, whatever the level of exertion is, it sounds like is relative. But that's all really good for our system as well. Just to reiterate to those people who need to be out there training new rituals.
And maybe that's like my bias rate, because I'm very active and going to the gym and being active, and I think that's critical. And for me, it's like the physical benefits are great, but it's about embodiment. It's about not being in your head. It's about reconnecting to the now in your physical felt presence. I think that itself is so healing and a big part of it.
Yeah, and when we talk about this whole the neuroplasticity and the piece of the neuroscience, which is so focused on the brain, I want to highlight to people this is also about the nervous system. This is all about the fibers in our body that are sending our brain the signals that make up this map that is our patterns or our past or what have you. And do you want to speak a little bit to just sort of the somatic response or how the limbic system interacts and how like the fascial system interacts and that it's all part of the greater whole? Is there anything that you feel like is important to unpack in that conversation around the body in that way?
Yeah, I'm glad you bring it up because it's so important, right? And something I like to say is that the brain, body, and nervous system are only separate in the words we use to speak about them, right? The reality underlying the words is all one thing. It's all one integrated thing. And so, yeah, you can't just ignore the body and pretend we're floating brains, which is easy to do, which I used to always do, just living in the intellect because it's easy and safe up there. But coming in the body is what you need to be an integrated human being. And yeah, and there's so many things, as you mentioned, like muscular tension, your patterns in your gait, like how you walk, your postural tendencies, and the fascia, and all these things influence your psychological and emotional life, including through like the vagus nerve and other pathways that literally influence your neurotransmitter levels in your brain, right? And this is not you mentioned the gut. The gut is a whole other thing, which is absolutely hugely influential too. And so it's really about caring for the whole human organism, right? And that's essential for integration. That's healthy. That's essential to be healthy. And the gateway into this is interoception, right? It's like we have this a really strong capacity to tune into the feeling states of our body and to be connected to them. But a lot of us are not. We're just straight up not. And all the major mental health conditions are associated with somatic disconnection in that way too. And so restoring that kind of somatic attunement, that felt embodiment, that lived felt sense is so essential.
Hi, it's Kristin. I've been wanting to crack the door on something and share some of the professional, deeply personal work that I've been doing. As you may or may not have seen in the arc of my journey over the last couple of years, I have begun working with people in the psychedelic therapy landscape. And you might be out there feeling like something deeper is asking to be met in you. And so this little break in the show is directed at you. I have a program called The Inner Quest. It's not a retreat, it's not a ceremony, and it's not an experiment. It's a private, trauma-informed, concierge-style container for people who really are ready to do this work. I'm so honored that I get to guide individuals and couples through transformational breathwork and these types of modalities inside an 8-week structure that includes nervous system preparation, elite supplementation, integration coaching, which is of the utmost importance because we can stand in the doorway of transformation, but if we don't do the integration from what we've learned, we actually don't get ourselves to heal in the same way. And I'm here to be your accountability buddy. I'm not here to chase calm with you. I'm here to build capacity for you to be able to feel, to repair, to hold down even more love and truth, and to step outside of the circle of fear that continues to rise in society. This is really high integrity work. It's not for everyone. It's private, it's personalized. I deeply support you in the process. And I just wanted to interject to say that if you're curious about working with me more directly, if you're truly curious, I would love for you to email me at kristin@wellpower.life. That's KRISTIN @wellpower.life. Tell me what's calling you forward, and then we can step forward together. What's the biggest mistake you see people making in the land of psychedelics?
Thinking more is better and just blasting themselves, because that could just lead to overwhelm, re-traumatization, destabilization, especially if not supported in the right context. The other one, thinking psychedelics do everything for you. It's like, oh, like, I'm going to go heal my depression with this one mushroom journey. Not realizing maybe do a lot of therapy beforehand and hit a plateau and then use the psychedelic specifically for that plateau and then be really focused with a clear plan on how you're integrating it, then maybe you'll get that lasting benefit. But it requires effort. I like to say psychedelics empower you to make changes in yourself. They don't make them for you.
Yeah, beautifully put, for sure. Because
Yeah.
we see this a lot, and even especially in the Austin community, but all over the landscape. The more that I get into it, it's like people are like, "I just did my 40th ayahuasca journey in 2 years," and I'm like, "Okay, feels like a lot. Is it? Are you unpacking any of that? This is why I take copious notes. I'm always like 12 pages of notes deep, and with consent of my clients, I'm taking AI recorded, compliant data recording so that I can at the end say, here's a massive summary of everything we covered, because even if it's me in a psychedelic journey, I can only remember like 10, 15, 20% of what came up, because there's so many, for me in many ways, and for clients I'm working with, there's big moments. And then you're like, it will take till the next day or the integration plan or the going through the notes to go, oh my God, I forgot that even came up. Right. And
Yeah,
it's like
totally.
bringing it into the awareness, and keeping it into the awareness is part and parcel of being able to create more transformation. Can you talk about a psychedelic experience you had that was like either way over the top or like changed your, like, whoa, this changed my worldview in a way that I didn't expect? And I don't know if you've had something like that go on, but
Yeah, I mean, there's actually several I can talk about right now, but I really like 5-MeO-DMT. That's my main medicine of choice right now, and it's like very, very powerful. Not for beginners. It's not to be taken lightly, even though it's a really short experience, like 20, 30 minutes maybe, but extremely
and
powerful.
the vehicle for taking that psychedelic, is it a capsule smoke?
You vaporize it, so it occurs naturally in bufo and like bufo toad venom, right? Bufo various toad, yeah, and the venom, but most people synthesize it. We want to conserve the toad, etc. And the 5-MeO-DMT pure molecule is kind of cleaner and it's like indistinguishable. Any case, so this molecule takes you full straight into just losing all sense of space, time, identity, and you just fully surrendering to this intense overwhelm of energy. That's how I experience it. And your body reacts in whatever way it does in relation to that. And for me, it really very like experientially and in an intense way showed me how dense and heavy thoughts are, and how light, free, vibrant, alive, just stillness, complete no mind is. Because I reached that state multiple times with it, and just showed me how kind of unnecessary a lot of thought is. Like 90% of our thoughts are completely unnecessary, and we're hyper rationalizing things that really just occur spontaneously through the vibrant intelligence that moves through you, and just being really connected to that. And so that's made a major imprint on me in my own meditation practice, et cetera, et cetera.
Do you think that
That's
it's given you pause from day to day in some ways? Like this conversation where you hear this line about like 90% of the thoughts we think every single day. I don't know if it's Dispenza or someone who says this, but every single day, 90% of the thoughts and things that we think are the same. Like, do you think that that medicine is specifically giving you a bit more like pause or distance from that, or ability to at least be less in the, I don't know if you want to call it the monkey mind, but that
yeah,
space? Yeah.
totally, totally. It's made me hyper attuned to where my mind is at in a given day, and makes it much easier just to be like, poof, let go, it's gone. That's the
Yeah.
ultimate superpower, I think.
Yeah, it really, really is. And there's so many challenges with stillness these days based on things that are going on in the world. And so I think it touch a little bit as we begin to get to a close of sort of like society in the future with these medicines, and just how we begin to incorporate them more as legalization happens. There's some countries like in Australia where MDMA is legal, and like little by little we see these things happening. And I think that there is a general consensus of hope that more of this will be integrated into regulation in some way. And I don't know what that's going to look like, but as we're like on this onset of I can't even call it the precipice, because I was listening to Moonshot with like Diamantis yesterday being like, the singularity is here. It's here. Let's go. And it's interesting. And there's so much, I have moments that I really sit in a space of fear around the AI landscape. I think I'm not alone in that. And also just really embracing that change is inevitable. And so how can we work with the tools that are happening for the transition that's going to happen, which will happen very rapidly for us, but I feel like it's bringing a layer of fear and misunderstanding to the future for people, or just let's just say living in uncertainty is going to be something we all have to get better at. And, living in the day to day, knowing that there's a very uncertain future for many pieces of our life, and like that could even be exciting adventure, if you want to reframe it in that way. But what are you feeling like psychedelics will either, how will it be a divining rod in some ways, or if it will be a divining rod for some people to navigate the future with everything that's beginning to open up and unfold at such a rapid pace?
Yeah, it's a really good question and a really tricky one. I definitely don't think psychedelics are the solution, or we should just give ayahuasca to all the world leaders and it would be a better place. It's a lot more
Well,
complicated. Because, well, the thing is, psychedelics are very context dependent, right? If people are doing it in a context, a MAGA rally or something like that, it could create that group consciousness that amplifies that energy, right? And so it's literally,
yeah.
it doesn't automatically necessarily lead people in a positive, quote unquote, ethical direction. And of course, that's subjective in the end too. But, I think, as kind of what I said before, as pattern interrupters, allowing people to make connections and see things in a new way. And, in terms of broader legalization and rollout, the hope is like, ideally, it's not limited to people who have a lot of money or just have this kind of selective insurance coverage, that people actually be accessible, which is a major concern. But if it is, hopefully, it is kind of scalable, accessible in that way, that it slowly kind of leads people, like it raises the collective, that people, this kind of more diffuse kind of accessible healing that allow people to connect to deeper parts of themselves and also see the possibility of transformation, right? Because a lot of people feel like they're just how they are, right? It's like, oh, I'm whatever, I'm 50 years old, 40, even 40. I've heard people even say at 30, it's like, I'm just how I am and this is how I'm going to be for the rest of the life. And my life, I have to accept and work with it, which is the most profoundly limiting, terrible thing you can ever say to yourself.
I know. I just
And
had a
it's like,
38-year-old woman come to me and say, I guess it's all downhill from here. I was
Jesus, I
like,
know.
well, I'm gone then.
Yeah, it's like I've heard 30-year-olds. It's like, I'm 31. I'm like, I'm just getting started. I'm just I'm like the very early start of my journey, basically. And
Yeah.
so I think psychedelics allow people to kind of a better sense of the possibility of radical transformation, with or without psychedelics, really. It's just showing that your brain has that capacity. And I think that spreading into the culture and more will also have a big positive impact.
Yeah, beautiful. If you were going to make like a recommendation, I recommend all the time How to Change Your Mind, because I think it's like a very grokkable, understandable, easy read, like for the parents and grandparents of the world. But is there anything that you feel like is a good read or something that people could tune into that would help them get a better understanding of this whole landscape?
Yeah, definitely How to Change Your Mind is my go-to as well, because it's Michael Pollan's such a great person to be guiding people who are on the outside of the bubble into it. Yeah, other than that, I mean, there are a lot of good websites with materials online,
And also,
third
let's
way.
shout out all of your work, educating people in all the ways and programs that you
Yeah, I was
do.
trying to avoid self-promotion in my
No,
answer.
this is what we're
But
here for.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Tell us more
But
about ways that they can get educated by you. Because here's the reason, here's the thing, right? I bring you on because I love you. I love your work. I've had a chance to be in a space with you. I can
Mhm.
feel like the openness of your heart and your mind and your capacity to want to have to give people information that's going to that they can take and make their own changes for the positive. Like it's very clean energy. And there's a lot of different people educating on these topics that may not have a similar like MO. And so, yeah, I want you to speak specifically about the programmatic work that you're doing in education for people to like level up their understanding and transformation. So tell
Yeah,
us.
it's very. Thank you. Yeah, so I'm on YouTube and Instagram as the psychedelic scientist. I have a lot of like kind of legacy reels and stuff on Instagram, like evergreen stuff, and also on YouTube. I'm not really active right now, but I'm planning to in the future in a kind of slightly different direction. I'm trying to figure out. I also have two courses that I sell. They're just at maneshgirn.com/courses. I have one aimed at more practitioners, clinicians, and people working in the space who want kind of accessible, concise, focused, curated overview of all of psychedelic medicine, from the neuroscience to the regulatory status to what exactly is psychedelic therapy to the history to microdosing to creativity. Throw it all in there. And then I have another course that's a bit more practical that talks about optimal preparation, kind of what to do during a session, how to optimize that in setting, and integration. Bring in a lot of stuff I talked about here. So I have that course as well. And yeah, hopefully they're useful for people. I designed them just to, the more kind of overview of the whole space and then practical so people can, choose which ones they want.
Yeah, awesome. I love that. I'm so appreciative. I always wrap with the same couple of questions. They are relatively brief, but the first one is there something that you're doing outside of the landscape of what we've talked about today that's like involved in your like morning, evening, daily routine, etc., that is something that just helps you like optimize your health and well-being across the board? I know you mentioned running, but is there anything else you're doing that you're like, this is a must do for humans?
I think spaciousness. I mean, time to yourself. We all know the world is just fucking nuts right now, and there's a lot to be outraged about, to feel despair about, and even veering into hopelessness, right? It's easy to go there, easy to get caught up in like, oh, I need to know who else there is in these files. I need to figure out the end of this thing, whatever. But it's like, if your cup is empty, if you're constantly in sympathetic overdrive, kind of engaged in all of this shit that's out there, you're less effective as an agent to act in your own life, in your own immediacy, in your own sphere of influence. And so taking space to ground and stay connected to yourself and prioritizing self-care and silence and solitude is so important, and is probably one of the most valuable things you could do these days to keep clear inside and to be a more effective change agent.
Yeah, beautiful. And the second question is, if you could go back and have a conversation with your 15-year-old self and give them one piece of advice that would help change the trajectory or just land you in a place of understanding and your own awareness, what's that piece of advice that you would go back and give yourself?
Literally just trust and have fun. Make it light. It's all a dance. Align with your highest self and then trust it'll all work out, and have fun doing it, basically.
I like the have fun part, especially because lately I think a lot of us feel like there's less play in the world, and I keep calling that in. In the midst of uncertainty, how can we call in more play and lightness and fun? And then, like you said, just really the trust in the universe and the trust in our own bodies to do the thing that is going to, bring us to our highest potential.
100%.
So amazing. Any last words or anything that we missed that you want to either shout out or call in for anyone who's listening?
No, I feel pretty complete. This is great. A lot of fun. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I really love spending time with you. I'm so thankful for the education and the knowledge and just the spirit that you bring into every room and container, whether it's digital or in person. And I would encourage everybody, if they get a chance to get with you in the real world, they should get with you. But either way, check out the courses. I'll put everything in the show notes and the links. And thank you so much for spending this time. I know your time is valuable and you're in the midst of travel. So I really, really appreciate you.
For sure, my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you for joining us here on Well Power. You can submit questions, learn more, shop incredible brands, and connect with me at wellpower.life, or follow me on social at biohacking.breath.cold. From comfort to courage, friends, we're doing it. Any foul language you hear is not approved by my mother.